Police officers of Reddit, what are you thinking when you see cases like George Floyd? For all the police officers here, what would the charges be if one of the bystanders pulled the police officer off of the poor guy? Wow, thanks for gold. Assault on a police officer, obstruction of justice, and probably resisting arrest, depending on state laws of course. That gets tossed in as an easy one to charge, but usually gets played off in court. I fear that, if someone had intervened, that version of the story never would have received publicity. Death is a much more weighty headline. It's hard to intervene when there's no visible precedent of it being effective, and there is a strong precedent of reactive brutality. I wish we had positive stories available on the news in which de-escalation worked. But in a similar way to flattening the curve, it's so much harder to count saved lives than lost ones. I'm a former police officer, and so have had plenty of training in physical restraint of individuals being arrested. There is no police academy training officers to kneel on someone's neck to subdue them. That's how you kill a person. There is extensive training on how to avoid seriously injuring a person while restraining them. And I guarantee you every one of these officers was trained to never strike a person in the neck or choke them. The officer who killed him is very clearly liable for manslaughter at the very least. And I think the other officers who stood by have some accountability as well, because they knew damn well that was not how you handle a person, and should have stepped up. Here's my question. Given that this officer was actively killing a man through an illegal use of force, what would have happened had a non-police officer stopped him? Granted, then the outcome wouldn't have killed the man, and thus there would have been no death to show that the use of force was obviously excessive. But that's the part that really makes me angry. Anyone who would have tried to stop this would have been arrested on the spot for assaulting an officer, even though the officer was literally murdering another human being. Lawyer here. While the literal text of most justification/necessity defenses would apply to using force in that situation, most likely the Good Samaritan would be charged with obstruction or interference with public duties. They would then have to convince a jury that there was no other reasonable recourse short of physical force. That's a tall order, and it'd be real nervous for my client. In a worst case scenario, our hypothetical Samaritan gets tased or shot or killed for their troubles. My thoughts? Record and verbally demand the officer stop is probably the wisest course. Absolutely sick to my stomach. I'm a lieutenant in my hometown police department. I started my day by showing the video to my officers and making sure my people understood that this is murder. Plain and simple. You never, outside of a life and death struggle, do anything like this. George Floyd was handcuffed and on the ground. If he was still struggling badly enough that they felt a need to hold him down, there's 100 ways to do it safely. Use of force should always be as measured and considered as possible. There will always be times where an officer sees danger and has to make a split-second decision without the luxury of weighing the consequences. That clearly was not the case here. He had all the time in the world to think about what he was doing. He had multiple people there telling him to stop, and none of his fellow officers intervened. All of that is why I find this incident particularly disgusting. They had so many chances to do the right thing. Luckily, I have the fortune of working with good people who see this shit for what it is. Before the video was over, before I told them that George Floyd died because of this, my officers were muttering things like, "What the duck is he doing? You can't do that shit, and he needs to get off the man's ducking neck." Made me way prouder to be their leader than any number of arrests they could make to see that their instincts were not to defend the officer. For what it's worth, I'm glad that they were fired. I've heard mention in this thread that one of the officers has been arrested, which is great if true. I hope they are all brought to justice. Their actions, and lack thereof, were completely unconscionable. Couldn't have said it any better. Waiting patiently to see the autopsy report. I bet it has to do with a crushed trachea. Not a local. I'm a Fed. 5 years into the job, George Floyd was murdered, and it's fucking disgusting. We're trained that anything involving the neck is a no-go and is considered deadly force. We were also trained that if you make an arrest in a prone position, you search and then immediately move them onto their side or a seated position, because the risk of asphyxiation is so great. If a suspect says they can't breathe, believe them and take measures to correct to it. This training is reinforced at least twice a year in our use of force training. These officers deserve to spend the rest of their lives in prison. It's reassuring to hear this. Any suggestions on how employment screening could be improved to avoid letting people like this join the ranks and tarnish the reputation of all the good cops? I'm not a cop, but I think we need a new organization specifically for investigating police corruption and crime. This organization should have an anonymous phone number good policemen can call to report crime, corruption, racists, etc. within a local or state police force and have them investigated. Retired after 28 years. Nothing less than murder. All the guys I worked with would never have considered doing something like that. You treat combative incustodies once they're secured as human beings. Nothing should be personal. Once they've been subdued and you are safe as an officer, you stand him up, pat him down, and understand that your arrestee is at a low point in his life. Give him some dignity and you'll generally get his respect. It works 90+% of the time. That man was subdued and nobody should have been on him at that point. The key phrase I keep hearing / reading in these cases, where the bad cop directly suffocates / strangles someone, or fibrillates their heart with a taser, or cracks their skull. Or maybe didn't touch them at all is, I can't breathe. Seems to me that this phrase should be an automatic emergency ambulance ride. You shouldn't look at someone who is having difficulty breathing, and then, for example, sit on them, on top of hot asphalt. You get the medical attention before they drop dead. That is, if you don't want them to die. But it takes time for the ambulance to get there, which is why you put someone complaining of breathing problems in a position other than one that causes positional asphyxiation. Arresting someone who isn't willing to be arrested is a violent process, but once they are in handcuffs the hard part is over, and it's time to chill out and act like a professional. I'm a police officer in California. I'm absolutely disgusted by the officer's actions. When someone is in our custody you must treat them properly. I don't care if they are arrested for murder or forgery. They are a human with a story and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. I had tears streaming down my face watching the video of George Floyd. We swore to protect our communities and that's what we set out to do every day. Putting a knee into the neck of a handcuffed man for an extended period of time isn't protecting. A man has lost his life due to the gross negligence of an evil person. May he rest in peace. Makes it harder to protect communities when you lose the trust of the public. These situations hurt you all unfortunately. Cop here. Disgusted. There are a 1000 reasons why this shouldn't have happened. Simple, easy, steps that should have been taken. Lessons that policing has learned over the past 200 years and basic things taught in every academy. Make no mistake, this was murder. Maybe not premeditated murder, but nonetheless murder. I will be angry if those officers do not get indicted. He's apparently been involved in at least 2 other deaths including shooting a fleeing suspect in the back. I don't know, given that history, premeditation seems reasonable. That is inexcusable. I was a cop in the military. In the police academy this was one of the things that taught us not to do as it could crush the windpipe. The only time I was ever taught to use chokes and neck holds was in combat training for deployments. But when we got back we always had to attend retraining classes to relearn what we can do stateside. It's amazing that time and time again you see military saying this is exactly not what to do, but for some reason the civilian trainers seem to forget to teach the same. Would I rather be a POW to an American soldier vs American cop? I'll take soldier every time. You know what's sad is I've been told police agencies don't wanna hire MPs because they're harder to retrain. Yet time and time again we prove them wrong by being better trained in humanitarianism. Sheriff's deputy here, and I must say that I'm disgusted by the unnecessary loss of life. There are moments that make me regret what I do, and this is one of them. I've met my share of racists wearing a badge, and I'm ready for a career change. The oath we take is to uphold the law and constitution. So for the officers on scene there that could have stepped in and prevented this, duck you. One bad apple always ruins the bunch. Unfortunately, I pray for the George's family and that justice is served. Throw away for obvious reasons, and yes, I'm a white male. Edit. Wasn't expecting this to blow up as it has. I'm responding to you guys when I can, and I'm glad we can have a conversation about this. We do not unionize in my state for law enforcement, and I see many comments about systemic protection and abuse. I have never worked under a police union, but I have worked with people who were unionized, and I have heard my share of stories where law is protected by the union. Stories I hear are about union protection from bad leadership, but I can imagine those protections may extend further in cases such as this. See, people say things like not all cops are bad, but based on what I've read in this sub, a lot of good cops quit because they get tired of the corruption and racism. The law enforcement system seems to filter out the good guys and the jerks are overrepresented. Yes, systems that reward arsehole behavior, e.g. by a lack of accountability, by increased profits etc., produce a significantly higher share of arseholes. It's like that in the police. It's like that in politics, and it's like that in business. Even the Karen calling the manager meme stems from that. Here the arsehole system is the flawed notion of the customer is always right. Didn't the same happen in New York a few years ago with Eric Garner being put in a chokehold? Yup, sure did. All the cops got off. As a son of a former police officer, my dad worked really hard to be an honest cop. His department was full of racists. They didn't like him because he was a decent cop. They couldn't do anything wrong in front of him. We saw the news together, and I saw him wipe a tear, but tried really hard to hide it. I know he's sad, and I don't want to push him to talk about it, but we both know things like this is always gonna happen. And that is a really sad fact. I can't possibly understand why a human being would do something like this. My grandfather was NYPD beat cop, passed over for promotions, and refused to have a partner when he could. Said it was because he found out that most other cops couldn't be trusted. He was on the force for nearly 35 years. From the time he got out of WWI to the early 90s. I've got a lot of family history with the NYPD and the FDNY. I had 4 cousins in the NYPD. All of them quit after saying cops are just too untrustworthy to be around. 3 of them joined up the FDNY instead. Now I got 9 cousins and 4 uncles on the FDNY, or formerly. I had a great uncle who had been a police officer. Told me once that in 20 years he only had to pull his pistol out of its holster one time on duty, and that was enough to take care of things. These days a lot of officers seem to think that whipping the guns out is step 1 for / or / situations. I work for a U.S. federal bureau, but I'm not a local police officer. All 4 cops need to go to jail. Derek Chauvin, the cop with the knee on George's neck, should have gone to jail long ago. The guy apparently has a history of doing this. This is his 3rd time in 15 years. Black people need to keep fighting, and white/Asian/Latino people need to support them. Justice for cases like this won't come easy, and it won't come soon. But if they keep fighting, I truly believe that one day, eventually, it will come. My former local precinct, they did nothing except eat pizza and hang out at the gas station across from where this happened. Their whole precinct needs to be investigated. They were never bothered with doing their job. I used to be a police officer. It was ducking embarrassing going out the day after something like this happened. One of the reason I quit was because I had no pride in my job anymore for the people doubting if I used to be a cop or not. This is the only proof I really have. In order to get the police officer flair on /r/protect and serve, you need to send the mods a pic of your police issued ID. Haven't been to that sub since before I quit, but here it is, link com/a/duck2knob. It was ducking embarrassing going out the day after something like this happened. I find it odd the police union itself never seems to feel this same sense of embarrassment about severe misconduct. Retired. It disgusts me as the job is difficult enough as it is, working mostly in sensitive neighborhoods. Brutality like this makes it far more difficult. How difficult was it for you to build community trust? Did you have to continuously fight against atrocities such as the recent cases? Or was your community more sheltered from those issues? I worked in a place where the population was about 75% black. As a white cop, I very quickly learned a lot about being respectful and how to be tactful. Humor goes a long way, and it's very important not to give off any sign of being fearful. They can sense it. You get used to shouts of abuse as you drive by, and guys on the corner will try to provoke you by openly drinking beer. Is it illegal? Yes. But you learn to pick your battles. If you do ever need to stop someone and question them, you know that if you take too long, you will suddenly find yourself surrounded by an angry crowd who have no idea what you are asking. People in these areas are almost always reluctant to even be seen conversing with a cop out of fear of being seen as a snitch. It is true that if you do need to make an arrest, there will almost always be some level of resistance, which makes things very difficult, as once you have made the commitment to make the arrest, you have to go through with it. I'm not in any way making excuses for the cops in this particular video, but it isn't easy. However, the cop with his knee on the poor guy appears to be of the alpha male type of cop. These guys are bullies by nature and very difficult to work with. If you personally police to different standards, it's very difficult to intervene as a partner, as you will likely be ostracized. You take this route and your career is over. Your social life is over. Your marriage will have problems, as cop families are pretty close. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.